wait for it. Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's Super Wild Card Weekend. 6 massive matchups as we begin to whittle down the National Football League field in a quest to crown the next Super Bowl champion. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we get into the big game breakdowns, I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners out there, FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard or use the promo code BetTheBoard. Take advantage of all sorts of great new user signups, whether it's 30-1 enhanced odds, $1,000 risk-free bets. FanDuel has plenty of ways to get you into the action. And if you happen to find yourself in the state of New York, all sorts of state-specific promos for you as well, as FanDuel Sportsbook went live there last weekend. So encourage all of you just in time for the playoffs to go out there and build those bankrolls. Payne, we put the first ever 18-week regular season in our rearview mirror, and I guess game 272 definitely did not disappoint between the Raiders and Chargers.
It did not, no. Good ending. Not the way I would have approached it. Obviously, everyone all week long talking about ties this and ties that. Always interesting, you know. I didn't like the discussion of the tie. At the same time, from the moment camp starts to the end of the season, when you're still in the mix for a playoff positioning, your number one goal is getting into the tournament. That's how you win a Super Bowl. And so it just stuns me that strategically you aren't playing that to a tie and effectively giving yourself a bye in the process. And so whatever league rules, maybe there's some type of forfeit. I saw people talking about that. If the game wasn't played straight, there could be a forfeit. Clearly the league was involved in making sure this was on the up and up. And I know a lot of people think differently about this, specifically odds makers. Right? They call it, shenanigans, but the reality is the smartest way to have made the playoffs was to play this game to a tie and have everyone handshake prior to the game and then take your free bye week in the process, right? That's how you make the playoffs. That's how you make a run at the Super Bowl. And it didn't come to fruition for whatever reason, but the game ended up being fantastic with lots of drama, lots of fourth down conversions late. It was back to the Chargers' hope and a prayer on Justin Herbert's right arm on 3rd and 4th down, and he made the game interesting. And then certainly an endgame situation that could have played out in a tie, but Brandon Staley, I guess at this point we find out what the players have discussed after the game. A little bit of a snafu, calling timeout to get a little different personnel in the field.
When you talk about all the things and the different ways that game could have gone, I asked this question, and we're obviously going to have no way of knowing. Do you think if it's two head coaches that have a great relationship with one another, say Robert Saleh and Matt LaFleur are in the exact same spot, knowing that they can have that open discussion, that there maybe is the more likeliness that there is a handshake agreement instead of two head coaches, one in the case of Rick Bisaccia, who doesn't know if he's going to be the Raiders head coach next year, most likely not, and Brandon Staley, who's drawn the ire of a lot of folks, given the Chargers' inconsistencies play a role as well?
It's possible. I think it's more... Yeah.
Very fair assessment, and definitely thought it was an interesting game to watch. Hopefully you were able to keep yourself awake, unlike the Pittsburgh Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin, who openly admitted he drifted off long before knowing if his team was going to have a chance to play in the postseason. We, of course, will get to Steelers and Chiefs. We have an excellent interview.
Are you buying that? You're buying
I actually do buy that. Sometimes when you're an old man and you're north of 50, you're falling asleep on the couch. It happens. It's not by choice. I may or may not have that happen for 15 to 20 minute intervals, not knowing where the time has gone on a college football Saturday throughout the course of the season. This is an open and safe space. I have to be transparent with our listeners.
To his defense, the Raiders were up 15.
Exactly.
So maybe that was.
And then it was the.
Okay. We'll give Tomlin the benefit.
It was
of the
the
doubt.
19 play, slightly more than 2 minute march as far as real football time was considered. That actually took 1 hour and 37 minutes of real time for the Chargers to get the game tying touchdown as regulation expired. But the Chargers, they're on the golf course figuring out what they're going to do in the draft. You do feel a little bit for folks that went over 9.5 wins for the Los Angeles Chargers and came up on the short end of the stick. But let's get into the games themselves, and we may as well kick things off in Cincinnati. We'll go in chronological order, rotation order, all one and the same as we get closer to the end of the season. And a game where the Cincinnati Bengals are a 5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game is 48.5, Payne. The Raiders come into the spot. Yes, they're in the playoffs, but an unenviable travel position. Having played the latest game on Sunday night, they'll turn around and play the first game on Saturday. Meanwhile, the Bengals' last playoff win came back in 1990. We know the memes and everything else that's circulated on social media. The Bengals haven't won a playoff game since the text message was invented. Last playoff meeting between these teams came actually in a game that ended Bo Jackson's football career back in 1990. The Raiders back in the postseason for the first time since 2016 and only the second time since they won the Super Bowl. First ever career playoff game for Derek Carr. When you look at the Raiders, plus 12-point differential during their 4-game win streak to close out the regular season. It's actually the smallest margin of victory by a team to win their final 4 games in NFL history. The previous record was held since 1926, and the Kansas City Cowboys. I don't think either of us watch them play a whole lot of football. Meanwhile, on the other side, Cincinnati rests all of their key contributors in the regular season finale, so they see the big, gaudy statistical numbers that Joe Burrow is putting up come to an end. But you do wonder about a young team on a big stage with a target on their back. And I asked you this question, Payne. Are you more interested to see Joe Burrow and company match up against this Raiders defense led by Maxx Crosby in the pass rush, or see how Derek Carr will fare against an oftentimes overrated Cincinnati Bengals defensive front?
I just think the game in general is very appealing. And I don't really have that thought about a lot of these games. I think the way the AFC kind of played out in Week 18, there were some better matchups for us to see, at least from a betting standpoint. But what is interesting is these are all rematches except 49ers Cowboys. And I don't necessarily love when there's like an anchoring bias, but I think sometimes when you have that data point, the public can kind of see it, and it creates value in the market because some bettors are unable to kind of remove themselves from the first result. And I think that's what's interesting about this game is then most will go back and kind of assess it and see that since he went into Las Vegas and beat the Raiders 32-13, they'll kind of remember the hope and heave offense that beat the Chiefs recently. But when you dig into that first matchup, the Bengals had 0 explosive passes. That was stunning to me. And despite winning by, the 32-13 margin, the Bengals were a net negative 1.8 yards per play, a net negative 11% in success rate. It was one of the more misleading games we've had this season. And I think that probably kind of trends us into the Raiders offense here a little bit. And I think there's a lot of talk this week, because there's only 6 games, so you try to talk about everything, I guess, right? Quarterbacks making the first playoff performance. And historically, there's been some dip in the play of those quarterbacks. There's typically not a mention of, it's colder this time of year, that could be why, or, an offensive coordinator kind of playing the game conservatively for his young quarterback, that it's just kind of all lumped on the quarterback. I don't know if that applies to Joe Burrow, though, right? Like, his vibe is just different. He's played in the biggest national championship stages at LSU, right? His entire college career was about, like, overcoming adversity. And if you go back and read a lot of the things the veteran players were saying about him in the Bengals facility, it was like, this dude stepped into the building day one, we knew he was the leader. So he clearly has the right demeanor. He knows how to handle himself. If Burrow's failing here, it's because of potentially not being 100%. Or Zach Taylor, right? Coming out with this like uber conservative game plan, trying not to lose. My hope is that's not the case. If you're a Bengals fan or backer here, right, you're hoping for some aggressive game plan, a similar one that we've kind of seen Cincy employ the last 2 Burrow starts of the season. You're hoping that happens, right? If you look at early downs, the first 3 quarters, Cincy's been the most pass-happy team in the NFL week 16 and 17, so more of that. But I could see Taylor, right, like trying to protect Burrow without the starting right tackle, and, you know, the left guard did return to practice, but maybe he's out, we'll see. But I don't want too much Mixon here. And so it's tough to kind of gauge that. If you look at the Raiders defensively, and I don't know if Zach Taylor's looking at them this in depth, like the Raiders on first down defensively, like top 7 in passing efficiency, but they're actually shockingly below average against the run on first down. So maybe if Taylor sees that, the approach will be Mixon a little bit here. We've talked a ton of Bengals football for the last few weeks, it feels like. So, not a ton has changed. I think part of the reason you're seeing steam on Vegas is the difference in schedules, specifically on this side of the matchup, right? If you look at Cincinnati's offense, they face the second easiest schedule of defenses, second easiest schedule of pass defenses, the very easiest schedule of run defenses. Then you have the Raiders, completely the opposite. Top 5 schedule of offenses faced for this defense. So a noticeable difference. Gus Bradley did a really nice job, as I mentioned in the first meeting, held Burrow to 0 explosives, 4.1 yards per play in total, kept everything in front, and it became a Boyd game, right? He had double the receptions of any other Bengals receiver. And if you can kind of remove the Chiefs games from your head, right, just kind of forget about those, in totality, the Raiders have done a nice job keeping things in front. They're top 5 in explosive pass defense. So the hope and heave approach typically does not work against the Raiders. Not as good down to down. That's why the Raiders are 21st in defensive pass efficiency. The game kind of just feels straightforward on both sides, right? Like pressure, right? The positive with that is like on this side of the ball, the Raiders don't blitz, right? 12% blitz rate, lowest in the league by far. It's 12% below league average. Burrow has done well against the blitz, right? If you look at his EPA when blitzed, it's through the roof. But like most quarterbacks, natural pressure gives him some trouble. And if you look at the Raiders, they're 8th in pass rush win rate. Bengals 30th in pass block win rate. Burrow's actually been a below average quarterback in schedule adjusted EPA when he's not blitzed, if you can believe that. And unlike the other side of the matchup, right, where Colton Miller's matched up against Hendrickson, Maxx Crosby gets to go against Isaiah Prince, the 6th rounder from Ohio State. He's a backup right tackle. When they brought in Riley Reif, who is like a 33-year-old below average right tackle, and he was the savior to that position, it kind of tells you what Isaiah Prince is. He's the 12th worst tackle in terms of efficiency among tackles with at least 200 pass block snaps this season. We know Maxx Crosby leads all edge rushers in pressure. So this comes down to the ability for the Raiders to get natural pressure. If they do, they're going to have a chance here. And that allows them to keep more guys in coverage and keep things in front. And sometimes that can frustrate Cincinnati a little bit when they're not hitting the home run play. So again, in the first matchup, you saw Tyler Boyd, kind of that guy over the middle of the field, kind of finding spaces and areas. And he was the most productive receiver of the trio. Tee Higgins, I think he's playing in this game, but is dealing with a little bit with a toe injury. So let's monitor that a little bit. But certainly there are some things on paper, at least schematically, that might give the Raiders defense some advantages here. And that's, again, not the perception, I think, of the outside world when you think about Cincinnati's offense.
When you mentioned Maxx Crosby and the outstanding season he had, the highest pass rush win rate he was able to generate in a single game came against the Cincinnati Bengals at home, and it was nearly double how productive he was in the game against the Dallas Cowboys. So talking about the Bengals offensive line and their ability to stand up against the Raiders getting natural pressure, no doubt about it, a huge storyline. I think that's part of the reason that Joe Mixon had his biggest workload of the season in that game. I believe he carried the ball 30 times to the tune of more than 120 yards, and throughout his career he has had some success working against this Raiders defense. On the other side of the ball, Payne, we saw the Raiders offensively start to get back to some of their true DNA. Josh Jacobs looked significantly healthier over the last couple of games, and we've seen them really lean on his running ability between the tackles. We know what Hunter Renfrow brings to the table. You're never quite sure who the Raiders will go to as a secondary option. You'd have to think that Darren Waller, getting some live reps under his belt, will be a little bit healthier and maybe can play more prominently as far as this game plan is concerned. But there's no doubt anyone who watched the Raiders offense operate against that Chargers defense last week saw a Waller that was an absolute shell of himself and as much a decoy as he was an actual contributor.
Yeah, just in general, this game feels like it has a ton of variance. The Bengals at peak, really tough. The Raiders, when Carr's cooking, kind of a different team. But when you kind of look at the 17 data points this season and throw it all in a pot, this is a game with, two teams outside the top 12 in our power ratings. And so trying to figure out which one plays at peak can be a little difficult. And I think we had already thrown the Raiders offense in the trash can about a month ago. And at the same time, I think we have to wonder what's happened to the Bengals defense. And I think it's a little concerning when you dig into some of the numbers. And you break the Bengals defense into two parts this season, pre and post bye. It's not pretty. First 7 weeks, Bengals defense, top 6 in EPA per play, success rate, EPA per rush allowed. Since the bye, Bengals are 26th in success rate allowed, 19th in EPA per play allowed, and 22nd in EPA per rush allowed. They've just fallen off a cliff. And if you look at some of the trending metrics, even a little bit deeper, right, and you look at weighted defensive efficiency, continuing to trend the wrong way, Bengals are 24th in that regard. So, maybe on this stage, guys along the D-line a little bit healthier, crowd fully in it, you see a little uptick. But I don't know what that defense is that, a ton of money was spent on, and you have some nice parts there, but certainly some issues. And to your point, I would still fully expect, whether it's Waller or Renfrow, to have some real success, especially over the middle of the field. That's an area where Cincinnati continues to struggle to defend, even with some of their guys back. And, there were reports last week, to your point about Waller, pregame saying he didn't play more than 4 consecutive snaps in practice all week. He didn't have the gas. We knew the injuries, right, to the knee and the ankle, but he also dealt with the big C. And so he had just been completely winded at practice. All of a sudden, he ends up playing 78% of snaps against the Chargers. To your point, though, not very efficient. I believe he was targeted 9 times, only caught 2. But I think you probably have the good Waller here, who's got his legs a little bit under him. Second week back, we know about some of the illness in terms of production the first week. He torched the Bengals in the first meeting, 7 receptions for 116 yards on 8 targets. But I think ultimately this does come down to Derek Carr. And it just feels like the entire season has been on him, the way he's kind of held this team and franchise together. And I don't think it's going to be any different here. And hopefully the O-line can hold up. At least, positionally, the Raiders' best in Colton Miller matches up against Trey Hendrickson. And so that'll be a good one-on-one matchup to watch. The other side of the line's a disaster, but let's see if, Sam Hubbard, who's better as a run-setting edge than a pressure guy, is able to kind of win that matchup convincingly. I don't know if he will, but we'll see. What is interesting is, you just kind of have this defense that I kind of mentioned here. They've spent the third most on the defensive line this season. Trey Hendrickson has 14 sacks. But as a unit, the Bengals are 25th in pass rush win rate. Pressure numbers do look a little bit better, but, it's not what you would expect for what you've paid for. And I think that's important because the one area where Derek Carr struggled is when he's pressured. And if you look at quarterbacks that have played at least 8 games this season, Derek Carr's 24th under pressure. That's where he's graded out. Carr's got 19 turnover-worthy throws when pressured to just 5 touchdowns. Passer rating dips 43 points. And it's also important, I think, to mention that Carr struggled a little bit in cold games. And as we record this now, it's supposed to be about 28 degrees at Paul Brown Stadium when kickoff is at 4:30 p.m. here. If you look at Derek Carr, when it's been 35 degrees or less, he's 0-5. His offense has never scored more than 17 points. And, you hate to say it, but right, California kid, played his ball at Fresno, NFL career in Oakland and in Vegas, indoors obviously currently. So it's something to think about. And then there's also some level of familiarity here. The Bengals offensive coordinator is Brian Callahan, who spent the 2018 season with Derek Carr in Oakland as his quarterback coach. So I would think, obviously, Callahan's got a lot on his plate offensively, but he's certainly going to go to the Bengals DC, Lou Anamarimo, and be like, hey, right, this is what I know about Derek Carr. This is what he likes. This is what he doesn't like. This is his strengths. This is his weaknesses. I was around him every single day for an entire year. So there is that like narrative stuff there that could play a role that's extremely tough to quantify, but not a lot of people will think about that. So something you probably haven't heard anywhere else. But I think bottom line, this side of the ball comes down to the Raiders O-line handling some pressure. Carr not making, a big mistake. Waller and Renfro causing some damage in the middle of the field and taking advantage of the Bengals backers in coverage. What's interesting here, Todd, is, we kind of have seen the early money come in, and sometimes we don't know who it is. We don't have the association with everyone. Like, I know the group that bet the Raiders Monday morning, and it opened 6.5 most places. The group bought to 7 cheaply. And from a core number perspective, this should be more like 4.8. But what's kept me off is the situation. And I know there's some things out there that say, hey, the rest advantage isn't that big of a deal. But the Bengals rested virtually everyone in Week 18. The Raiders played a 5-quarter war. The last game of Week 18. Now you have the first game of Wild Card Weekend. But I think why that matters is not just because of that game, but if you really look at the Raiders' schedule, this is their 5th playoff game effectively.
Oh, they got to be gassed, man.
Week 15 at Cleveland with playoff implications. Game comes down to a game-winning field goal. High leverage. Week 16 versus Denver, playoff-like game. At Indy, Week 17 comes down to the final drive. You kick a game-winning field goal. And then you have the 5 quarters against the Chargers end in a game-winning field goal, right? It's just like a lot of emotion and energy spent. All high-leverage games that came down to the wire. Now it's the shortest turnaround of any team. You think about the Bengals. When's the last time they left the state of Ohio? Before Christmas. It was like December 19th, I think. So you do just wonder. I know it's playoffs. Everyone's hyped up. Derek Carr hasn't been there. Like, these guys are going to be juiced. But you just wonder if there's going to be some gas in the tank late. And it's not just because of last week's situation, but that the Raiders have been playing playoff games now for over a month.
You mentioned it. I mean, when you look at the Raiders' win streak, 3 of those 4 wins have come on the foot of Daniel Carlson on the game's final play. So it's not as though they've been able to take their foot off the accelerator. And I kind of said to you that my handicap for this game, I would have been much more comfortable making a stronger case for the Raiders if they were able to get out of the game against the Chargers at 29-14 and didn't have to expend all of that emotional energy over the final 5 minutes, let alone the 10 minutes of overtime, because they could have had that collective sigh of relief, that comfortable victory. Now you're talking about a further tax on the system, travel, elements, and a variety of other factors that we've discussed at great lengths ever since day one of doing this podcast. Numbers tell part of the story, but it becomes extremely difficult to quantify some of those other elements that can't manifest themselves on a spreadsheet the same way certain things will.
No doubt about it. And the guy that leads this group, who took the 7 on the bye, did tell me that he actually bet first half +4 -15 and preferred that slightly over the 7 they were taking, and maybe it's because of what we just discussed.
There's no doubt that if things start poorly for the Raiders, you do wonder if stuff can snowball. But regardless, one of these two teams will have a chance to punch their ticket into the next round and the start of a long legacy for Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, or a career milestone long overdue for Derek Carr, being underappreciated given what he's meant under center for the Silver and Black his 8 years there. To the nightcap in frigid Western New York, where it's the Buffalo Bills doing battle with the New England Patriots for the 3rd time this season. It's Buffalo, a 4-point home favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 44. The only other playoff meeting between these two teams came back in 1963, and it was when the New England Patriots were called the Boston Patriots. Last played, obviously, the day after Christmas, a game that essentially decided the division. When you look at Bills Mafia, this will be the first time since 1996 that the Bills are going to have a full stadium at full throat. Last year, of course, in their playoff games, they weren't able to have that building packed to capacity. And when you listen to some of the player comments and coaches' comments, they know that the noise, the passion, the pageantry will all be on full display. The headliner for this game, Payne, is, of course, the defenses. The top 2 scoring defenses in the league, the Bills allowing 17 points per game, and the Patriots a shade more at 17.8. But you look at the schedule these teams have played, and there's maybe some noise in some of those numbers. New England been a little bit better defensively on the road than they have been at home. But fascinating storylines nonetheless, where Josh Allen will do battle with rookie quarterback Mac Jones, and which offense can find some sustained level of success.
Yeah, third time we're talking about this exact matchup in 7 weeks, so there isn't a ton of earth-shattering new stuff here. If you're looking at the Patriots offense with Mac Jones, who, again, has played some big games, obviously, at the college level, I would still expect heavy personnel from New England, especially on early downs. I would expect run game, right? I mean, if you just look at the first two matchups in week 13 and 16, the Patriots on early downs the first three quarters lived in heavy sets 62% of snaps. And I would just think New England's going to want to play bully ball again. And it's probably not a bad strategy in cold weather to employ like a physical brand of ball and make tacklers feel you. Buffalo's just an average tackling defense to begin with, right? And now just kind of add some frigid weather. You could see those backs, especially, bigger backs, being tougher to tackle. I think our thoughts on Buffalo's defense this season have been well documented. Certainly a good defense, a top 10 defense. But a lot of variance to that unit, and they faced the second easiest schedule of offenses. And, you kind of get specific to their run defense. If you look who Buffalo's faced the last month of the season, it's 4 rush offenses with an average efficiency rank of 19th, so below average. Yet Buffalo's 28th in EPA per rush allowed over that stretch, 23rd in rushing success rate allowed.
How dare you disparage the Jets' offensive performance last week in Orchard Park, New York? How dare you, Payne?
I did see at one point in that game, they had snapped the ball 35 times for a grand total of 65.
Yeah, it was ugly.
It was.
It was ugly. That wasn't actually at the end of the game, though, because I think they finished with less than 65 yards once all the sacks accumulated on Zach Wilson's body by the time the 60 minutes had run out.
I stopped watching
Smart
at that
man.
point. It was just, it was brutal for me. So, I'm kind of getting back to our point here. It's like, I am all about scheming to opponent. And I, understand defensively you have a system and you want to adhere to certain principles. But if you're McDermott and Leslie Frazier, I think you have to make Mac Jones and the Patriots receiving corps beat you, right? I mean, that was an obvious in week 13, right? With the wind up to 55-mile-per-hour guts, like, hey, load the box, right? Buffalo did that. Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson faced the highest percentage of 8-man boxes of any running backs that week. But in week 16, with more favorable conditions, Damian Harris only faced a loaded box on 33% of his carries. And so you're hoping that number is a little bit higher this week. When New England does drop back to pass, let's see how Mac Jones fares. We thought, all of us, right? We just loved how Mac was trending into the bye week. And we're like, hey, they're going to be able to throw more on his plate. He's going to have a week off. Obviously, long season. College football doesn't play this long of a season. All of the things that we thought would come out of the bye really haven't come to fruition. He's regressed a little bit out of the bye. He's struggled, especially early in some of these games post-bye. And if you look at the 4-game stretch to end the season, Mac Jones, 26th out of 29 quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage above expectation in the first halves of games. So something to think about here. Also, let's keep an eye on starting left tackle Isaiah Wynn. Did not practice on Wednesday. That, I think, is more significant since New England plays Saturday. And that could be significant against a Bills defense that basically is like a hockey team, right? Like Leslie Frazier treats his defensive ends like hockey players, just constant rotating of fresh bodies, and the Bills, because of it, are 6th in pass rush win rate. So let's keep an eye on Isaiah Wynn there.
Bills offensively, we've seen Devin Singletary get much more involved in recent weeks. We've talked at great lengths on this podcast about how dynamic he can be, more so as a runner and a receiver between the 20s, not necessarily a viable red zone threat. But you saw his workload continue to tick up, 100-plus scrimmage yards and 2 total touchdowns each of the last 2 contests. He had accomplished both of those things 0 times leading up to it. When you look back at the Week 16 matchup between these two teams, J.C. Jackson has been the primary defender on Stephon Diggs, not only in that game, but obviously the game before. You just kind of throw out the 3 passing attempts. Isaiah McKenzie became the biggest beneficiary. He had 11 catches for 125 yards and a touchdown. When you're Buffalo and you're trying to scheme up an attack plan to go against this New England defense, We saw Matthew Judon and company put up great sack numbers. Those have kind of fallen off the table in recent weeks. J.C. Jackson is and can be effective neutralizing Stephon Diggs, but it should open up a variety of other opportunities for some of those secondary options in the Bills' passing and running attack.
I completely agree. And, you know, what's interesting about this side of the ball, and you know, I think we try to do our best giving listeners something to think about differently when it comes to these games, or put something in the air they have to chew on a little bit. And so when you listen to other coverage this week, and hell, we just did it, right? Like everyone's going to talk about the Bills defense shutting down the run, you know, but the normal breakdown is like stick another guy in the box. And that's exactly what we just discussed, right? Sell out to stop the Patriots run game. And that should absolutely happen. But you can also hinder the ability of New England's run game on this side of the matchup as well. And you do that by building a lead with your offense, right? So it is really important for Brian Daboll to come out with an aggressive game plan. Attack, right? Not just in play selection, but in mindset. Buffalo went for it 3 times on 4th down in the red zone in Week 16. It paid dividends. You have to have that same aggressive approach. Build a lead. Turn this into a Mac Jones game starting his first playoff game on the highway in a raucous environment. That's how you also stop the run game, not just by sticking a guy in the box, but build a lead here. So I think you want to come out, get Josh Allen comfortable, right? You literally want to keep him moving, keep him warm. I mean, he came out earlier this week and said his top priority in cold games is to keep his feet warm because he has bad circulation down there and loses feeling in his toes. So, you know, not only are design runs a way to keep the blood flowing a little bit, but they're really smart. If you look at Josh Allen, he's picked up a first down on 51% of his designed runs this season. Even the unscripted scrambles are a quarterback's best friend, right? First read isn't there, second read isn't there. When Daboll dials up an early pass on early downs, like just take off. Super efficient play as an early down scramble. And I think when you look at Josh Allen, that's something he's been really successful doing over the years. Has the highest EPA on scrambles this season by a long mile. In fact, it's the highest EPA on scrambles for a quarterback since our data started in 2006. So that first down play when Daboll is going uber aggressive, to your point, if J.C. Jackson's locking up Diggs a little bit, now Diggs did win that second matchup pretty handily, but if Diggs is getting handled,
J.C. dropped a single biggest play in that second matchup. It was a tailor-made interception that may have changed the entire dynamic, not only of that game, but the entire division.
Yes. And so, you know, if J.C. Jackson is doing decent work on Diggs and he's not there on that early down throw, like take off, run, you know. But again, I think you come out, you attack through the air, get Josh Allen comfortable, because I think that is a big thing. And a lot of people just kind of, you know, assume like Wyoming quarterback with a big arm, and that is partly why Buffalo drafted him. But he hasn't been the best in the NFL in cold weather games. The sample is super small, but he's played in 3 games with temps below 32 degrees since the 2019 season. Completion percentage, 51%, more picks than touchdowns, 58 passer rating. So you do want to get Josh Allen comfortable early in this game. If you're paying attention to the injury report, Patriots safety Kyle Duggar, who's super versatile, has not practiced this week. They claim he got in a limited yesterday, which means he might have been in shorts and just ran across the field one time. But he was not present during the open part of the media portion. Corner Jalen Mills was placed on the COVID list Tuesday. Let's see if he can clear it in 4 days. My understanding is he does have symptoms. So if he is somewhat able to clear it, he's certainly on the mend, and we know what production looks like off this illness a couple days later. Jamie Collins, who is clearly the defined coverage linebacker for New England, far and away the best cover linebacker, has not practiced this week. Dante Hightower didn't play in Week 18. He's been limited in practice all week. He's terrible in coverage. Jawan Bentley is a 260-pound linebacker. He can't spell coverage, okay? So you mentioned Singletary at the top there. He had 5 receptions in the Week 16 game. Might be something to consider if Jamie Collins is out this week and they're stuck with Jawan Bentley on the field more than usual. But at its core, right, you got to attack New England through the air. They've faced a below-average schedule of passing offenses. They've faced a below-average schedule of quarterbacks when you look at EPA plus completion percentage above expectation. And if those guys are out in the Patriots secondary, you know, it's game on. But let's monitor some of those injury situations for New England from now on.
Have we seen the Bills begin to scratch the surface on what this team is capable of doing, or does this become one of the more dangerous teams in the AFC, knowing that we've only seen glimpses of, I think, this squad we expected to see week in, week out, and maybe their poster child for the most complete effort was that Sunday Night Football game against Kansas City this year?
I think this AFC is wide open. I think the entire thing is wide open. And, you look specific to, it would make me nervous, right? And this is kind of, you hate to go back and post-date information that you and I have only taken advantage of. But, prior to week 18, I sent you a future. And as a team that I typically hate, it's Tennessee Titans that were getting 20-1. And I just said, if this falls right, where they're able to win their week 18 game or week 17, was it before week 17? It was before Bengals Chiefs.
Yeah, it was before they secured. Right? It was before they secured the number 1 seed.
Yep. It was week 17, the Thursday before week 17. I said, hey, if the Bengals are somehow able to win this, it's going to set up for the Titans. And then you start to think about them getting healthier and their style, right? They're going to want to run the ball. We got word that Derrick Henry was going to be back. And so you can probably run the ball in Buffalo a little bit. You can probably run the ball a little bit on Kansas City, right? You face the Packers in the Super Bowl, you can run the ball in the Packers. So there was a couple of things there. A lot of people have kind of thrown Tennessee out, and I was one of them. I didn't really like them. But if you get this combination of their offense, the Titans that is, from the first couple weeks of the season, and you get their defense from the last 2 months of the season, and then you get the right matchups, and you had a 1 seed, 20-1 was a ridiculous price. Buffalo, to your point, certainly if Daboll changes some things, and he may, right? Because what's better than hanging a 30-burger on New England here and then fielding interviews on Sunday morning? He's certainly going to have all the tools at his disposal to hang some crooked numbers here, and I don't think any of the matchups are too wow, oh my God, this is too much to overcome. If they get it right, they certainly can win the whole thing.
I almost want.
I just don't know if they can quite get it right, and I don't know if we've seen the right teams to potentially attack the secondary. Obviously, Tre'Davious Ward is a big miss, right? So if you're going against the Packers, that can be a little difficult. But I mean that the secondary's done a nice job since the loss of Tre'Davious Ward, right?
It's definitely an AFC.
Tre'Davious White, rather. Yep. It's tough, right? They continue to play with 5 guys in the secondary. They're not changing their style. They're very good with some of their zone concepts back there. And you would think Tre'Davious White was this massive loss. I still think it is. I still think in the right matchup it is. It just hasn't quite proven to be yet. Right, Zach Taylor, or Zach Wilson rather, isn't going to expose that. Matt Ryan without protection isn't really going to expose that. Mac Jones in 55-mile-per-hour winds isn't going to really expose that. So it's going to require the right matchup there, and then maybe that's how the Bills end up going down this year.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see if seeds hold and you get Bills Chiefs in the AFC semifinals, and the Titans get the benefit of the doubt and most likely taking on the winner of the Bengals Raiders game. So many interesting dynamics in place when you talk about reseeding and everything that does go into it. From Saturday into Sunday, Payne, and we'll start things on the west coast of Florida in Tampa, where the Bucs will welcome in the Philadelphia Eagles. And you're looking at Tampa at 8.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook, a total that's crept all the way down to 46. Amid weather speculation that Mother Nature could have her hand in deciding the outcome in this, both side and total. Bucs are trying to become the first repeat champion since Tom Brady's Patriots did it back in the early 2000s. The Eagles, meanwhile, enter the playoffs as the only team in the postseason without a win against a single other playoff team. You have two polar opposite teams doing battle. The most pass-happiest offense in the NFL, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The team that runs the football with the highest proficiency and rate, the Philadelphia Eagles. When you look at the previous meeting, the Bucs dominated, led 28-7. Philadelphia snuck in the back door with 15 unanswered points late. Tampa nearly doubled up in time of possession. Jalen Hurts under 50% completions, and his yards per attempt, 4.4. Now, to the Eagles' credit, they said that was the game where they did a little self-scouting, reinvented themselves, and were able to figure out how to run the football. It just happened to coincide with a schedule that got significantly easier in that regard as well. You've seen this Tampa offense been as good as advertised when playing at home, but we know they're going into the playoffs without a couple of key cogs offensively, the main one being Chris Godwin. But we've seen Tampa handle adversity in the past. Tom Brady, no stranger to using secondary weapons, and it's not exactly like the cupboard is bare. If you're Philadelphia and you're devising a game plan to try and stay in this one from start to finish, Payne, what gives Nick Sirianni his best potential path to success?
So just kind of starting here, because I think it's important, and I think some of the paths to victory have changed slightly when you look at weather, and I think that's probably the best place to start, right? As it stands right now, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., there's a 70% chance of rain, with 23 mile per hour steady winds, gusts into the 30s. And that is why we've seen this total come from 49.5 down to as low as 45.5 as we record this. But it's Florida, and that can change, especially if you look at what's projected to hit, right? It's like this 6 to 8 hour band that just so happens to be hitting the Tampa area. And if it comes through late or early, it could easily change the makeup of this weather. So I think you want to keep a close eye on that. Going under 49.5 makes some sense with that kind of weather. I know, our number on this game was like 48.6. And so we were initially contemplating some under with some right matchups. The matchups I didn't really love, so we didn't do it. And then all of a sudden, poof, the weather came in. And multiple groups hit this multiple times. But I can tell you 45.5 is certainly short in ideal weather conditions. So kind of keep an eye on that. I also think it impacts the way these teams can attack a little bit. But, when you look at the Eagles offense specifically, like go back to week 6, right? The Eagles were one of like the 10 most pass-happy offenses. Since the Lions game, the Eagles are the most run-heavy team in the NFL and by a long mile. And they went into that Tampa game, the first one, without Dallas Goedert, without Lane Johnson. You could argue that Dallas Goedert is the most important player on the Eagles offense because of what he allows you to be in the ability to disguise some of the things on offense that Goedert can kind of be there as your tight end, right? He can line up in line. You can throw from heavy sets. He can help on the edge as a blocker from 11. All week, I've just had a really tough time with this game. I've had a tough time gauging the Eagles offense and what it can be because like at its core here, this is obviously a run-first offense. And now Philly does it a little bit differently. But for the last 2 to 3 years now, we've banged the drum that you can't run on the Buccaneers. Don't even think about running on them. If you have that game plan, you're a bumbling idiot. So it makes me nervous. Now, I understand that the Buccaneers defense has clearly dipped some. If you look at Tampa since week 8, their defense is just kind of middling against the run, 14th in EPA per rush allowed. And over that stretch, Tampa's faced offenses with an average efficiency rank of 24th. Only 2 offenses over that 10-game sample rank 13th or better. There's a lot of poor quarterbacks in this sample, right? It's Trevor Siemian, it's Zach Wilson, it's Sam Darnold twice, it's Taylor Heineke, it's Taysom Hill. For the Eagles to have some success, in my mind, they need to pass from heavy formations on early downs. Similar to what we discussed with Josh Allen. If Jalen Hurts' first read isn't there, he needs to take off. Unscripted quarterback runs on early downs are just an EPA monster, right? The designed early down run stuff, not as effective. I think when you pair that with tempo, it would be really smart for the Eagles, right? They're 9th in first half pace. If you can keep Vita Vea on the field, come play 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, he's obviously less effective at that point. Shaq Barrett and JPP are both back, and certainly that will help the Buccaneers' run defense because JPP sets the edge quite well, but neither have played in multiple weeks. So maybe tempo tires those guys out a little bit quicker. All told, though, I'm interested to see what Nick Sirianni comes up with because, the idea of passing from heavy sets and using Hurts' legs from unscripted runs on first down all help. But what if Barrett and JPP's return is what's been missing from this run defense? You go back to the first meeting, Jalen Hurts was stopped when the game actually mattered. And again, I know they're a little bit more pass heavy there, but even when they attempted to run, just not good. Tampa clearly took their foot off the gas in that game. But if you look at the first half, the Eagles ran 22 plays for 73 yards, 27% success rate. The idea of Jalen Hurts' legs were non-existent in the first 2.5, 3 quarters. All of Hurts and the Eagles' success on offense in the first meeting was just during junk time. And the Buccaneers were without Winfield in that game. Levante David didn't play. Also could potentially miss this game. Keep your eyes kind of peeled for that. Murphy Bunting didn't play in that game. Jamil Dean left that game early. So my point here is, like, if the secondary is a little bit healthier, you can dedicate a couple more resources to the box if Jalen Hurts is just going wild. I also think, obviously, again, going tempo is the right move, but JPP and Shaq Barrett being back certainly should help the run defense a little bit. So the question becomes, like, if they can't run, then what? And so you're left with Jalen Hurts. If you look at his spray chart, something we've talked about over time, like, he's really only effective throwing to like one portion of the field. Like, that's just kind of who he is as a passer at this point. And, there'll be the similar discussion that we had with Lamar Jackson, right? At some point, it becomes a race where the improvement as a passer has to happen faster than defenses being able to adjust to the legs. And that will be the determining factor if Jalen Hurts has some longevity in this league. But right now, again, if you look at his spray charts, like, he throws to like one part of the field effectively. And so if you can stop the run and the designed run stuff, then what? And that makes me nervous kind of going into war, kind of outgunned a little bit. But I do think the weather, if it's in play, certainly would help the Eagles a little bit more, Todd.
The other side of the ball, when you look at Tampa, Payne, last year en route to the winning the Lombardi Trophy, they scored 30-plus points in every single playoff game. This year, they averaged more than 30 points per game. They were second in the NFL in points per game, yards per game, third down, and red zone, all top 5. Allowed the fewest pressures of any team in the league. And when you look at Tom Brady, the sack rate was a shade more than 3%. Even more impressive when you consider that 76% of their offense came from passing plays. They will get Leonard Fournette back in the fold. At least all signs point to him playing a key role yet again in this playoff run. We know what Mike Evans can do on the outside, but the connection between him and Brady oftentimes has looked erratic. Rob Gronkowski should have opportunities in the middle of the field. You would think against this Philadelphia defense, it won't quite be as smooth sailing as getting force-fed last week to reach his $1 million incentives against the Carolina Panthers. But how important for Tampa does the emergence of some of their secondary options, specifically in the passing game, play a role, not only in potentially winning and covering against Philadelphia, but if Tampa is able to make a deep run in this postseason?
Yeah, it's going to be vile. And we just saw John Brown was signed prior to our recording. So they're certainly looking for some weapons. The kid out of LSU there has a banged up hamstring. He's like a track star. Surreal Grayson, I believe his name is. So they're looking for weapons, obviously. And that is part of the reason for this coming down a little bit as well, right? I mean, no Brown, no Godwin. Fournette is certainly back. When I look at this, and it's going to be very similar to what we said in the first meeting. It's just not a really good matchup for the Eagles defense. And the one thing that we've looked at over the years, when you want to back the Eagles, it's when their defense has a decided advantage with their front four. And I don't see that being the case against the Buccaneers, one of the best O-lines in football. And so that edge gets negated a little bit with Fletcher Cox and all those dudes up front. And again, kind of going back to that Week 6 matchup when we broke the game down for Thursday Night Football, this just remains, to me, one of the worst matchups possible. Now, again, weather, wind certainly hinders the passing team a little bit more than the running team. But Brady ultimately is the kind of quarterback that's just going to take what you give him, right? He's got no problem saying, thank you. Give me the 5, 6, 7, 8 yards a pop, and I'll methodically work the ball downfield just like he did in the first matchup against the Jonathan Gannon defense that obviously plays a little bit soft. And you would hope that Jonathan Gannon, especially in a playoff setting, employs a game plan that's specific to opponent and doesn't just throw his hands up and say, hey, we're just going to do what we do. There was a breaking point post-Raiders game where Fletcher Cox and Sirianni called him out for not being aggressive enough. Since that time, right, like the coverage has gotten just like a touch tighter. The blitz rates have gone from like non-existent to like, oh, hey, they do know how to blitz. Nothing substantial, but it has gotten just a touch more aggressive. And to your point, like Gronk did not play in the first meeting. Probably going to have a field day here unless Gannon doubles and brackets him and has Slay on Evans, right? And just hope you can survive that. if that's not the case, it probably gets a little bit ugly. But you just look at the Eagles, right? I mean, just in general, they don't invest at the linebacker position. That's not what the analytically driven organizations do. And so when you look at the Eagles, they've allowed the most receptions and touchdowns to the tight end position, both in counting stats and efficiency. Philly is bottom third in the NFL defending tight ends. So that's interesting to me here. But again, like the weather certainly makes, I think, this game a little bit more interesting, right? When you're the 9.5 point underdog, you want all of the random elements thrown into the bucket.
Rain,
there's a fumble
snow,
here, right? You want everything.
Hurricanes, hail, tornado, just bring it all together.
Yeah, I mean, and we have seen two different thought processes this week, right? At 10, one group I speak with nibbled on the dog. At 7.5, one group bought a cheap 7 and laid it. Weather certainly muddies this game up a bit, and again, I think it probably helps the Eagles a little bit, but at its core, right, like, you think about this matchup, and it's like a terrible one for the Eagles defense, traditionally, right, unless, again, there's 25-mile-per-hour winds, and Brady's trying to throw through that, helps. And then if the Eagles can't run, then what? You hit this perfectly at the top, though, right? Tampa, one, we know has been playing better at home. The group that took the 10, by the way, also ran to bet the Panthers last week, and that didn't go very well.
You know what? That game could have ended a little bit differently.
The game day move was the right move there.
Could have ended a little bit differently if Tom Brady didn't fight to get back in the game to help Gronk with incentives when Carolina cut it to a 7-point margin late.
Yes. Definitely could have won a little bit better. But to your point, going back at the top, like the Eagles have just been crushed when they step up in competition. They have one win this year against a winning team. And the winning team got to be a winning team the last week of the season. And when the Eagles played this winning team, which is the New Orleans Saints, they were just crushed with COVID. And so, again, there's just this massive dichotomy of Eagles football this year when they play someone with a pulse versus when they don't. And even with Tampa obviously dinged up a little bit, they clearly have a pulse.
That is a very fair point, and I think Tampa has aspirations, obviously, of getting back to the big game for the second time in as many years, as do the two teams that'll do battle Sunday afternoon in arguably the marquee matchup of Wild Card Weekend between the 49ers and Cowboys, two teams that played what felt like annual showdowns in the playoffs in the early 90s. Dallas, a field goal favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on this game sits at 51. First postseason meeting between them since they played annually between 1992 and 94. Cowboys have not made it to the NFC title game since 1995. We know this is a fan base starved for a little bit of success and to restore the legacy to the star. Only 6 teams in the league now have a longer drought of getting to the conference championship game. The Cowboys, however, though, no strangers to struggles against good teams. Their only win against a playoff team not named the Philadelphia Eagles was an overtime triumph against the New England Patriots, albeit a game that they dominated when you dig into that box score. Meanwhile, on the other side, in come a 49ers team that was able to figure things out after a sluggish start, going 7-2 straight up and against the spread down the stretch. And against Dallas, hey, look, Dallas has had its fair share of point spread success. A league best 13-4 against the number. The 49ers, pretty fortunate to be in this spot, had to erase a 17-point deficit last week against the Rams. But sometimes when you're playing with a bit of house money and your confidence is at an all-time high, given Deebo Samuel's comments this week, you can be a dangerous out. When you look at this matchup, Payne, which side of the ball do you think will be more fascinating and indicative of who emerges victorious at Jerry's World?
Both sides obviously are critical, but I think when you look at the 49ers and you hear all week about this being an ideal matchup for them, it's because of their offense. It is really a tough matchup for the Cowboys. I don't think you could handpick a worse offense to face, and it's really because of the aggression they play with defensively. And, there's going to be some negative plays that end these 49ers drives. There's no doubt about it, right? You're going to get the pitch play on first down that loses 3 yards. And I think it's absolutely vital on those series where Dallas creates the negative play and it's 2nd and long and 3rd and long, that Jimmy G doesn't turn it over. Because if Garoppolo is willing to fight another day here, right, there's going to be plenty of explosives the 49ers hit on other drives when the Cowboys' over-aggression gets them burnt against a Kyle Shanahan offense with this much window dressing and misdirection, right? But that's what this side of the ball in game comes down to. When Dallas creates the negative, and Dan Quinn dials up pressure, Jimmy G doesn't throw the game away. And if you look at Jimmy G, he's graded out dead last among qualifying quarterbacks when pressured. Jimmy G under pressure makes Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold and Trevor Lawrence look like franchise quarterbacks, okay? He's been that bad with heat. And in a game like this, right, take the sack, throw it into the dirt. Just don't make the catastrophic mistake. And that hasn't been the case this season, though, right? And when you look at Jimmy G and he's been pressured, his turnover-worthy throw rate is approaching 10%. And so for me, that is the most important thing this week. I also think one of the most important injuries to monitor this week, and today will be a big day, is Trent Williams. I think he is the most important player that is potentially injured, that could play, that could sit out this entire week. He is that good of a left tackle. Doesn't matter his age. He apparently doesn't age. He's been the best tackle in football for about a decade now. But at its core, right, this is a bad matchup for the Cowboys defense. And if you remove the Week 18 game where the Eagles just said, hey, we're gonna punt this thing, if you look at really who they have faced in the 10 other games since their bye back in Week 7, only one offense ranks better than average in rush efficiency. It's Kansas City, who doesn't really run, but when they do, they're solid. And over this 10-game stretch, Dallas has faced offenses with an average rush efficiency rank of 23rd. Yet they're 19th in EPA per rush allowed. The 49ers are going to shock that system a little bit, right? They're top 5 in rushing efficiency, and they've done it with guys down on the O-line. They've done it with just a smorgasbord of running backs. Doesn't matter who it is, right? Elijah Mitchell, Todd Furman, it just doesn't matter. They're able to run the ball.
You think I could pick up a couple
Dallas
yards?
Also
you think Kyle Shanahan could scheme me for a yard or two behind that offensive
especially
line?
If Trent Williams is out.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if Trent Williams is there. Right, you just kind of get one of those pitches. You just got to beat Micah Parsons to the edge. Do you think? I
think I'd lose 17 yards, and I think I'd end up with 37 broken bones as my 155-pound frame got shattered into a million pieces.
So, there's also some other areas here where Dallas, struggles a little bit. They don't defend the middle of the field. It's partly because of the cover 3 they play, mostly because of the Jimmies and the Joes, right? I had a chance to speak to one of, I think, the best beat writers the 49ers have a few days ago, and I just like to pick people's brains to kind of get a vibe. And he flat out said, expect Shanahan to attack and pick on Leighton Vander Esch. So this does feel like a George Kittle game. He runs almost 65% of his routes in line, which is the way you want your tight ends to attack Dallas. Cowboys have given up a 61% success rate and 8.5 yards per attempt to tight ends in line. Deebo Samuel, also a guy that can have great success over the middle here. Ayuk, as we've talked about over time, has started running more routes from the slot once he got out of Shanahan's doghouse as well, right? Whoever's in the slot running over the middle has a chance for real success here, but why Deebo is interesting and should do real well is he's a monster after the catch. And Dallas is 31st in allowing yak. You want to throw underneath and make, Trayvon Diggs a tackler. Probably not going to go overly well. Now, if you're backing the Cowboys or you're a Dallas fan, you're hoping Dan Quinn knows Kyle Shanahan, having hired him and spent 2 years with him in Atlanta, admiring his offense at practice every day, and some type of curveball is coming. We've certainly heard Micah Parsons speak up this week and say, we're not going to get bullied. We're going to bully the bully. That's where I come from. And so we're going to get out there. We're going to stop the run. Obviously, that's the entire conversation. And if you can stop the run and Trent Williams is out and pressure Jimmy G, and Dallas is going to win by 3 scores. But it's it's a little bit more difficult than that, I think. You hope Jimmy G's finger issue is a real problem if you're a Cowboys backer. In not so many words, though, Jimmy G said he took some pain-relieving meds at half. I didn't know you could shoot up a throwing hand because I just assumed the whole thing would go numb, but that's what happened. There's been some rave reviews for the doctor staff on how he was able to just pinpoint the finger and only give a touch of an injection and not a normal injection. So there's been a lot of praise for the San Francisco's lead medical guy.
Tyrod Taylor needed that guy.
Is that the injection will take place from the onset this game for Jimmy G.
Hey, you take advantage of all the tools at your disposal to try and put yourself in the best position to win games of this magnitude, and we'll see if Jimmy G can be the key cog in creating a balanced attack for the 49ers offensively. On the other side of the ball, we look at San Francisco. On the defensive side, a return of Dre Greenlaw and Emmanuel Mosley clearly paid dividends, especially in the second half when it felt like the 49ers were able to play a little bit more downhill. We'll monitor K'Wan Williams. I would expect him back in the fold as well. But more importantly, for the 49ers, do you sell out to take away the Cowboys' rushing attack and make them one-dimensional there? Or how do you go about devising a game plan if you're DeMeco Ryans, knowing how diverse, dynamic, and explosive Dallas can be when this offense starts to click on all cylinders?
I think you're playing a game where you're just wondering what Dallas is going to do, right? Because I think we believe they probably run the ball a little too much, right? Like, it's pretty straightforward here. Like, it just comes down to, like, what version of Kellen Moore and Dak Prescott, Jesus, you're getting here. And, you know, certainly that combination's performed better at home. And clearly there's some manual adjusting to do to some of the Cowboys' offensive metrics for when they're actually fully healthy. And those two parameters of at home, fully healthy, the Cowboys' offense becomes scary good. But I think if you're Kellen Moore, you should probably lighten the rush attempts and increase the pass rates. And, you know, DeMeco Ryans has certainly shown some improvement over the course of the season. And if you look, since week 11, the 49ers are actually number one in EPA per rush allowed, but they're still below average through the air. And you mentioned Emmanuel Mosley's return. That's huge. And then there was a couple guys last week that came off the COVID list. But Emmanuel Mosley isn't like your traditional number one. He's the best guy the 49ers have. But that's still the area of the defense to attack. And, right, like, DeMeco Ryans, to your point, has made some nice adjustments. And the 49ers defense has improved. You do look at some of that improvement, and you look at the last 8 games, some of it's a byproduct of competition. You know, average rank of offenses faced the last 8 games for San Francisco is 19th in efficiency. If Kellen calls the right game, Dallas should also have success offensively. And what's interesting here, Todd, and sometimes, you know, we always want to be the podcast that looks at all angles, right? I would put our total model up against pretty much anyone right now, and there's a lot of tweaking we can do this offseason that we're looking forward to, but I would put that model up against just about anybody, and I can tell you that there's also more to this, because our model didn't show value in this total. It was like 48.5. Now we're out to 51 because of all the matchups we've mentioned, that San Francisco is going to have some success offensively if Trent Williams plays and Jimmy G is not turning it over. But I also think Dallas has success offensively here if they find the right game plan. And that's always the scary thing to me, because Kellen Moore is always like the hottest flavor of the month early in the season. And then for whatever reason, there's typically like this lapse, whether teams catch on to what he's doing. I don't know, but it's typically not as good down the stretch. I also know he's obviously vying for some head coaching jobs. The Dolphins are going to interview him. I'm not saying his focus is going to be elsewhere, but I'm not quite sure Kellen Moore is going to have the right game plan. Like, this just needs to be less Zeke in my mind and more trusting of Dak and airing it out a little bit here.
A lot of wrinkles, fascinating game to watch, not only from Team A against Team B on an offensive defensive side, but on both sides of the ball, as I think whoever emerges victorious from this game can give the Green Bay Packers all they can handle and then some, should that be the matchup that we get in the divisional round next weekend. To the Sunday night affair back in the AFC, Payne, where the Steelers and Chiefs will renew acquaintances, a game we saw just a few short weeks ago. This time, Kansas City finds themselves as an overwhelming double-digit favorite, laying 12.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on this game sits at 46. Assuming the number holds, the Chiefs will be the largest favorite ever in the wild card round. The previous 6 double-digit favorites we've seen have all won and covered, most recently the New Orleans Saints last year against the Chicago Bears. As a 10-point favorite. When you look at Big Ben, he's never been this big an underdog in his entire NFL career. The previous high came week 14, way back in 2007, when the Steelers took on when the Steelers took on the New England Patriots. Steelers seeking their first playoff win since 2016, a game they won right here at Arrowhead, where Chris Boswell made 6 field goals. Something tells me if Chris Boswell makes 6 field goals on Sunday night, probably not going to be enough for the Steelers to move on in their quest to bring a Lombardi trophy back to the Steel City.
He missed a chippy in the first meeting, although the wind was howling. I don't really want to spend too much time here, Todd. I mean, the matchup isn't good for Pittsburgh, but at the same time, there is a massive tax to back Kansas City here. It's the most inflated line of the week in our minds. On top of that, the last time we saw the Chiefs, right, both Tyreek and Kelsey were hobbled. The top two running backs are dealing with injuries as well. And when you have an inflated dog and a team that shouldn't be here, it does make me nervous that it's an absolute free roll for Pittsburgh, so they kind of play loose and free. There's just zero pressure. You also have to kind of account for the Chiefs' defense the last 2 weeks, looking like it did the first 5 weeks. Very poor fundamentally, poor tackling, communication breakdowns, getting hit for explosives, getting beat to the flats, which is an area the Steelers typically attack. And whether it's coach speak or not, I did like what I hear from Mike Tomlin this week. And it's a guy who historically hasn't had this mindset, but Tomlin came right out and said, like, we're making significant changes to our game plan this time, from concepts to formations. Tomlin flat out said, for those that are in our business, the changes are significant. Let's see. That's certainly been a different vibe from like, we're going to do what we do approach that Tomlin's had in the past. Let's see what he comes up with defensively. And saying all that, right, like line inflation, Chiefs not 100%, Tomlin claiming to be open to change. One group I respect laid 7 on the Chiefs in the first half. They're responsible for this being 7.5 across the board now. Pittsburgh has started horrifically in games. The vast majority of their offensive production comes in the fourth quarter when most of these games are done and over with. At one point this season, over 50% of their points scored came in the fourth quarter. But I can also tell you if this game kind of got nutty and somehow got to 14 on the full game, closer to post, I would expect some decent nibbles from number grabbers who made this like 10.8, 11.2, kind of in the range we made it. There's also probably something worth mentioning, although it probably has kind of been fixed this morning, but something happened overnight where Najee Harris deleted an Instagram post questioning Big Ben's comments about being the worst team in the playoffs and not deserving to be here and how they have no chance as a 20-point dog. Obviously, well, true. the quarterback was kind of just making a point, right? And it's at like, no one believes we can win this. Everyone's doubting us, right? It's back to that approach of being a free roll. And I think once Najee understood to take it in that context, the delete, the text or the Instagram post rather was deleted, and the squabbling on social media probably is going to subside a little bit here, and everything's going to be perfect in that regard. Other than that, right, like this is just not a good matchup for the Steelers. But again, the price is inflated. I don't think we spend too much time here. It's one of those things where you're either plugging your nose and taking the points because it's a little inflated, or you're just kind of moving on. Or, as I alluded to, that group who said, hey, like, we think the Chiefs have a substantial edge in the matchups, as we kind of alluded to, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are very slow starting, so we're just going to attack this in the first half. And, you know, if it is a situation like it was last time, late in the game, where the Chiefs are up a bunch, perfect situation to then get your guys some rest that are ailing a little bit, and maybe Pittsburgh sneaks in the back door that way. So those are kind of the two approaches there that the groups I speak with have taken and will potentially.
It makes a ton of sense. There's all sorts of angles to take. Sometimes the best ones don't avail themselves before kickoff. You have to wait for a live situation to play out before you walk to the window with the best investment on any given contest. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. We do have one final game to go, but before we get there, it's time to welcome in our third contributor. He joins us every Thursday here on the Bet the Board podcast. You, of course, can follow John Sheeran on Twitter at JSheeran. That's SHEERAN1981. And John, normally we kick things off talking about the NFL or even college football like we did last week in anticipation of the national championship. But we're going to go in a different direction here, given a big story that's circulated throughout the sports gambling community regarding single-game parlays, which I know we've talked about at great lengths. This, of course, in the NBA with Draymond Green, who logged a robust 7 seconds in Golden State's game and Klay Thompson's return. Wanted to get your take on how you guys approach those kind of situations, knowing that one player's absence obviously creates or can create a ton of liability. and how you guys handled it in-house before maybe we get into some controversy throughout the rest of the industry in regards to the way they approached dealing with some of their players.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is, look, it's a really difficult situation. It's a very, very nuanced edge case. It very, very rarely happens. But clearly, once kind of the announcement was made at, I think, about 9 minutes before tip, there was clearly a big opportunity for bettors out there to catch bookmakers, for lack of a better word, with their pants down. So you're in a position where you know Draymond is going to be on the court and is going to record a stat and therefore is a participant. And all of our rules are written across the industry, that is, to basically say once the player is active, he's action and all the wages are action. So from our perspective, our trading team jumped on it incredibly quickly, identified it immediately once the news broke, and I think we had the market suspended on Draymond Green for within a minute. So we accrued a small amount of liability on unders, and we didn't feel like there was a decision to be made. Our rules are pretty clear, and we graded all of those as winners immediately once the game was settled. So for that perspective, that's how we handled it. We saw it as a clear opportunity. We did void the overs. I didn't feel like it was a fair bet. People who had bet overs on Draymond clearly didn't get a run for their money, and for that reason we voided the overs. So we didn't really think anything more of it beyond that point. It was an obvious edge case. We dealt with it well in-house and applied our rules and tried to be as fair as we could to those over bettors, and that was the end of it from our perspective.
Were you surprised that there was as much pushback from other operators? And we don't need to get any of the specifics in terms of them citing, quote unquote, nefarious activity or insider knowledge, that they weren't willing to pay out some of those particular wagers in a timely manner. I think some of them actually lingered for up to 36 hours before ultimately they decided to do the right thing.
Wouldn't be fair of me to comment about specifics, but what I would say is, I haven't seen any evidence. We didn't see any concerning wagers in the bets that we took. We saw people who took advantage of an opportunity that was there for about a minute. We would have had significantly more liability if it had remained on site for even a couple of minutes afterwards. We've identified in the past people spot this stuff really quickly and are able to jump on it. So I've got some sympathy for operators out there who found themselves in a different position. But I really think once your rules are clear, this was an edge case, and I don't know that anyone had any grounds to void it, unless people thought there was some sort of integrity questionable activity. And like I said, I can only speak to what we saw, and we definitely didn't see any of that on our side.
Well, speaking of sweats, how nervous do you think bookmakers were industry-wide when the Chargers and Raiders ended up going to an extra period, and we saw valuable sand start to tick through the hourglass with the potential of that game ending in a tie? Given some of what we discussed last week, half jokingly about, the Jaguars creating the potential scenario for a doomsday type outcome as far as Roger Goodell and company were concerned.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of nervousness. We had exposure on the tie of tens of millions of dollars, but I was pretty calm about it. I thought, the game was played in really the right way. I think there's no doubt about that through the entirety of it. I think when Josh Jacobs ran it down the middle of what didn't seem to be 100% on the first down and second down, as we got to the 2-minute time in overtime, I think maybe I started to wobble a bit then. And yeah, it was good to see them kick the field goal. I think there was a valid reason for them to do it. I definitely think Staley's timeout impacted their decision. Were they going to run it? Yes. Did they run it? Yes. Did they go for 10 yards or whatever it was? Certainly. But I think, people have illustrated it on Twitter as well that they changed the defensive package and took a linebacker out who may have been there to make a tackle earlier. So I think from that perspective, it definitely impacted the outcome of the game. But I think anyone who had the Jaguars into a tie in the second game got a hell of a run for their money at whatever odds they were able to take.
Full disclosure here from a selfish standpoint, as the Baltimore Ravens had a chance to go up more than 10-6 and Tyler Huntley gets intercepted in the end zone, I may or may not have been rooting for that game to end in a tie, only to get Chargers money line at advantageous prices refunded that crashed and burned in my face, since the Ravens weren't able to expand their lead and create a potential scenario for the Raiders to rest players or not place nearly as much emphasis on the game. But I digress. Going in from, last weekend, John, in week 18, looking at, the playoffs, we obviously know what's at stake as far as some of these games playing a little bit more true to form with all players being available. When you looked at the board this weekend and the way things lay out, I have to imagine it's a bookmaker's dream when you have standalone spots. Now with the addition of the Monday Night Football game is kind of the cherry on top to generate additional betting handle.
100%. This is just the perfect dream scenario, as you said. 2 games Saturday. We don't get, we get 3 primetime games, obviously running into Monday night. I think the matchups and the flow of the games is incredibly appealing. It's good for our new product, which is Same Game Parlay Plus, which allows you to same game parlay the first game on Saturday into a same game parlay on the second one as well. And that's not a free advert for the product. It's just an interesting, I think, product that people will be able to experience this weekend. So, very, very excited. Expect things to be hectic in terms of handle. We've New York on board now, as we spoke about last week, and the initial numbers there over the weekend were pretty mind-boggling. So expect handle to be at an all-time high, and very excited to break down the board this week.
Speaking of New York, and Payne, I'll give you a second because you can ask the hard-hitting questions that people actually care about in regards to the games themselves. It was interesting, John, to read some of the legislation there that I'll admit I didn't realize, that you can't bet actual college sporting events that are not only involving New York State schools, but games taking place there. Have to imagine there's some of our listeners that may not be aware of that. And with the NCAA tournament, at least the opening 2 rounds in Buffalo, New York, probably won't be something they're thrilled about. Always interesting to see how certain states go about it. They think they're doing a favor from an integrity standpoint. But just interesting wrinkles and dynamics as you get in new markets. So want to kind of alert our listeners that definitely took advantage of the aggressive promos that I know you guys had to get themselves in action for New York. But Payne, go ahead, my friend. Fire questions away at John. Put him on the spot for all the 6 games that we have this weekend in the NFL.
I did want to ask, right? We've talked about future liability a couple times throughout the course of this season. Over the last 4 or 5 days, once we've kind of seen these matchups come about, is there anything in terms of future liability that's come in over the last couple of days, something new that maybe you've seen some sharp guys tackle?
I think we spoke about it, a couple of weeks ago, and really a continuation of that is just the idea that, the good teams that have got the buys, teams that have performed well in week 18 and got themselves in, they've all certainly been appealing. So the front of the market primarily, we're definitely trying to dodge the 49ers. We're pretty much the lowest in market at about 20-1 on them. So haven't seen any sharp play on them. But I think, people before or as week 18 was happening, planning and plotting routes of like who might have to go where. We're definitely interested in some of the long shots like the Steelers, for example. We definitely saw some sharp play on them at huge odds, and now all of a sudden they got to go to Arrowhead and knock off the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think what I'm saying is not really. We're dodging the Niners. They probably would have been the most likely one, given I think what is a likely matchup advantage that they might have. So thankfully we've managed to kind of steer clear of that, and we'll take them on in a different spot, I think.
It does make some very interesting future markets when you look at the 49ers and some potential matchups if they were to win this weekend against Dallas, their ability to run the ball, not just in this game, but a potential matchup with the Green Bay Packers as well. Makes sense to maybe start there and not start at the top of the board. What have you seen so far this week on 49ers Cowboys, and anything in-house that would be different from current market in that game?
We were really surprised by the opening and the rest of the market. We opened this game as Dallas a 2.5-point favorite. We've moved to 3, but the market was 4.5 or 5, I think, in other spots. So market very much come towards us in that game. I think from a matchup perspective, we really like the Niners. I think they'll win the game. I think they've got enough on both sides of the ball to cause Dallas a world of pain running the ball. I think Kittle is a good matchup this week for the Niners after a few quiet weeks in a row for him. And I think they'll be able to have success defensively as well. So for us, one of the strongest opinions this week would be San Francisco. I'm surprised by the money for them, I won't lie. Like I said, we opened up 2.5. I would have expected, given where the market was, an influx of Dallas money under the field goal, and we really didn't see it. It has moved to 3, as I said, but almost a 60-40 split in favor of Dallas, and I would have expected more home money for the Cowboys in the spot. It is about 2-1 in terms of the money on the Cowboys, but very kind of surprised by the public demand. I think everybody and their dog like the Niners this week.
Yep. A game that has attracted some professional money early in the week is is Raiders Bengals. A rematch from earlier this season that probably looks a little bit different in the advanced box score than the actual score. What are you seeing on that game?
Yeah, another one where we had a pretty good opener versus, I think, some of the market. 4.5, we opened it up. It got to 6. It's kind of come back towards the Vegas Raiders now. Yeah, like you said, I think it was week 11 when they met previously, a 20-point win for the Bengals. I think that isn't a fair reflection of the game. The game didn't really seem to be a whole lot in it until a couple of turnovers for Las Vegas gave Cincinnati short fields. I think this really just comes down to how much pressure Joe Burrow faces. We know how good he's been against the blitz, with an all-time nearly 10-year high in terms of EPA against the blitz. And I think now you're in a scenario where with just 4 rushing, and we saw the success the defensive ends for the Raiders had last week against probably a backup right tackle and Maxx Crosby in particular this week. This feels like he's going to be under a hell of a lot of pressure, and his efficiency when he faces that pressure is obviously much reduced, and he's basically an average quarterback in the league from there. So for me, all about those 2 defensive ends and how much pressure they generate, and I think I trust them to get a lot of pressure. And for that reason, we're pretty high on the Raiders at 4.5, and we'll take a position should it move back towards Cincinnati again.
In the nightcap there, Mac Jones, obviously no stranger to big games, but first playoff game on the road in what's going to be a very hostile environment. What are we seeing there in terms of price and any feeling you have potentially on the total that's bounced around this week?
Yeah, I think there's potential for people to overestimate the impact of the weather. I think it'll be cold. I think we'll largely dodge everything else. So from that perspective, feels like a game that maybe we'll probably take the over on. We did make it just around about 45, so a little bit lower than where it sits right now, but it has come down, or it has come up, from a lower number. So I think there's an opportunity there for people to bet that. We don't really have an opinion. I think the number's broadly accurate, and we'll stay pretty much market on the side in the game. In terms of money, yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of money for the Bills in this game, and we'll certainly want the Patriots.
And starting on Sunday afternoon, Eagles-Bucs, we know the Eagles have struggled against teams that have had a pulse. What have you seen on this game? Obviously, as it stands right now, looks like some inclement weather coming in, which has impacted the total as well.
Yeah, we opened this 7, actually. I think in hindsight, we probably wanted to be a little bit higher. Probably didn't factor in the matchup a little bit. Or didn't factor it in enough even. So we've readjusted that to an 8, and the market's come back to 8.5. I think there's potential here if the weather doesn't kind of get any worse than what it's scheduled to be for the over again. I think it's compressed due to potential for high winds and rain. We all know the weather in Florida and how quickly that can change. I think both teams will have a lot of success, Gronkowski in particular for Tampa Bay. And I think the Tampa Bay run defense is maybe not as good as it was last year. So I think containing Jalen Hurts and the offensive line for the Eagles will be a challenge for Tampa Bay, and you could see the Eagles having success on the ground. So outside of the weather, kind of like the over in that one.
In the Sunday night nightcap there, you kind of hinted initially that the Steelers had taken some money. Where are you guys at price-wise on that one? Because it does feel a touch inflated.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. I think we opened this at 11 or 11.5. I can't exactly remember. Our adjusted number after the Wednesday discussion is 12, and it's come down from 13.5 to 12.5. I think you'll just see a lot of Chiefs money in this. I think people will take the lazy handicap route and just figure the anemic offense of the Steelers won't be able to go toe-to-toe with Mahomes. I actually think Pittsburgh's defense could have a decent amount of success in the game. And yeah, I think the number will be artificially high, but it'll probably take a brave man to bet Ben and the Steelers in the spot.
No doubt about it. And Monday night, Arizona and the Rams, McVay has absolutely owned the Cardinals in his 10 games against them. When you have teams that are this familiar and you have a strong trend where just 9-1, the Rams are kind of covering the spread or outperforming expectation by nearly 10 points, is there some type of inflation that you might have to make an adjustment on this game for? And then maybe what is the impact if J.J. Watt returns on Monday night? And apparently he's going to be at practice today.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think this is a spot we probably struggle in. We are a little bit under where the market was, just made it over a field goal. Obviously, the number's at about 4 now, so we've a very, very small lean towards Arizona. I think if we get J.J. Watt healthy, we'll probably see this tick down, probably more than it even should, and maybe get a field goal and then the Rams might represent a small bit of value. So we have a small lean to Arizona in the game. Expect to see a lot of Rams money, though. I think everybody has an inflated view of how good they are. I think their defense isn't as good as the sum of the parts. Individually, obviously, very, very good, but collectively struggle with the run. And yeah, they've owned them, but I think Arizona probably a dangerous side. They've been very in and out in the second half of the season, but at that sort of price right now, we'd have to favor them over Los Angeles, I think.
Makes complete sense. Todd, anything?
I think it's always interesting when you look at a team like Arizona, and of course, that's the final game we have to break down on the podcast, Payne. For a team that started the season like a house on fire, was the lone undefeated team late in the year, and you look at their future odds, I mean, they came into the season in that 35 to 40 to 1 range at John's shop, and now you can get them pretty much exactly where they were before the year started at 30 to 1 because their stock reached a peak and has really come crashing down. So you do wonder if they're a dangerous dog, if they're able to survive this particular matchup and maybe have DeAndre Hopkins waiting in the wings. So great to get your perspective, John, on that kind of as a teaser as we go in. When you look at the full board as far as, trying to estimate liability, does it suffice to say that you'll just be looking for one of these big favorites, maybe in the form of Tampa, to lose outright to kind of eliminate some of those teaser liabilities and money lines? As we've heard books, mention to us over the last couple of years, hey, it's extremely difficult time of year for teaser bets, knowing how many of these games end up landing right around the number both side in total.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Look, my view on teasers is that obviously there's the Tampa Bay leg, which bookmakers won't like. Outside of that, I have no issue with any other teaser in terms of potentially causing us problems. So my advice to any listeners out there thinking about teasing is, sure, I'll give you Tampa Bay, but I'll take anything else that you want to put with it on the board. So I'd be steering clear of teasers this weekend unless you can find something that you like to go with Tampa Bay. But the bookmaker in the house will be happy enough for the juice you're paying to get it. So I'd be steering clear of them everywhere I could if I was you.
I didn't bring this up earlier, Payne, when we talked about the Bengals and Raiders. John, you'll get a kick out of it. I was listening to some local radio out here, and you'd be amazed how many talking heads are encouraging people to tease the Raiders up because they missed the chance to buy to 7. So it's extremely important to use a 6-point teaser, taking a price from 5.5, so you get through the 6 and the 7, and you get some of those other key numbers. So that kind of explains the recreational bettor's mindset, something that we've tried to discourage around these parts. But for all of our 2 or 3 steps going forward, we do take a step backwards. So I'm sure our listeners find it helpful to have you reiterate the fact that if you're going to welcome teaser legs pretty much on every other game other than the Tampa Bay Bucs, it may tell them everything they need to know about trying to find a loophole in the system this weekend.
I hope so. But yeah.
Todd just karma
best of
that
luck
game
this weekend, my friend.
11,
appreciate your contributions, obviously, each and every week. We'll look forward to getting your take on how the divisional weekend played out for the house and obviously for the wildcard weekend, before we get into 4 divisional matchups. Same time, same place next week. Best of luck this weekend, John.
Thank you, guys. Have a great weekend.
Busy weekend for the bookmakers, Payne. All of these essentially become island football, and the handle is going to be through the roof.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. It's a bookmaker's dream. You just hope it doesn't turn into a nightmare if the wrong results happen. But what is interesting here, there aren't a lot of teaser options. So you negate some of that liability, although there will be plenty of money line parlays happening, right? Chiefs to Tampa, I think, probably be the number one candidate there. But ultimately, we don't feel bad for John and the books. They've had a great year. And so we hope some of the recreational guys do a decent job this week. I just think it's very interesting. And I go back to what I said at the top is, 5 of these 6 games are rematches. And so I think you're probably doing yourself a little bit of a disservice if you think what transpired last is ultimately what's going to happen here.
You have to think that if it's a chalky weekend overall and everything runs into Monday Night Football, the books will find themselves rooting for an Arizona outright victory. Now, will they get that? Remains to be seen, with the Rams a 3.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook, one of the lowest in the market, is worth noting. Total in the game sits at 49.5. The teams, of course, split their regular season meetings, with both winning away from home. The only previous meeting between these two franchises in the postseason came way back in 1975. When you look at the first matchup between these teams earlier this season, the Rams allowed a season high in points, rushing yards, and total yards. They were outscored 30-10 after the first quarter, and Cooper Kupp was held to a season-low 64 yards. The only game this season he actually finished with less than 90. But when you look at this Rams team, they have owned the Cardinals. Sean McVay, 9-1 straight up, 8-1-1 against the spread. When matched up against the Arizona Cardinals, Arizona's experienced a lot of prosperity this year as an underdog, specifically on the highway. But so many moving pieces, given that level of familiarity between these two teams. Payne, can Arizona keep some of the momentum we saw against Dallas Week 17, or will they look more like the downtrodden defense that was absolutely gashed by the Seattle Seahawks in the regular season finale when they had a chance to win the division?
That's the only momentum Arizona's had in the last...
I was trying to be positive. I was trying to find the lone glimmer of hope that the Cardinals have provided their fan base over the last 4 to 6 weeks.
I will say the line would certainly indicate that the Cardinals have a chance here, and it wouldn't stun me to see this potentially come back down a little bit, especially if J.J. Watt is announced in. But we've kind of talked about this over the last month or so, and certainly some sharp guys that play the spots and the situations, not necessarily the numbers guys, got right in the Dallas game. But, we talked immediately that Monday and we're like, didn't really feel like Arizona's back. It just felt like Dallas sleptwalked for 3 quarters, and when they actually decided to turn it on, had that game gone another 2 minutes, Arizona's now, coming into this with losing, what would it be, 5 straight? And so that becomes the question, is like, what is Arizona at this point? I'm not really sure. If you look at Arizona offensively, they've dipped to 19th in EPA per play since DeAndre Hopkins went down in Week 14. And teams are defending Arizona just a little bit differently without Hopkins. When you look at their early down success rate, which is very predictive, right? We talk about turnovers being the leading candidate to ATS covers, but it's not predictive. Early downs, number 2, and they are predictive. So it doesn't necessarily bode overly well when I just look at some of the metrics for Arizona. I think this is going to be a game where clearly Kyler Murray has struggled down the stretch. Let's make no bones about that. Has not been good. Regressed substantially since the last time these two teams have met. But I think it comes down to the run game. I really do. I think if you can get James Conner and Chase Edmonds involved here, it's going to go a long way. We know both of those guys are battling some injuries, right? Both of them have rib injuries. Both of them, one's dealing with a toe as well. The other one's dealing with a heel injury, right? I don't think either 100%. But if you look at the Cardinals' offense, they like to operate from 11 personnel, 3 wide sets. They do that on about 55% of snaps. When they run from that formation, they've had success, 52% success rate running from 3 wide sets. If you look at how the Rams are built, they've given up a 55% rushing success rate on runs from 3 wide sets. So I do think if the Cardinals are going to have some success here offensively, they have to get the ground game going a little bit. I would say shorten this game a little bit, as crazy as that might sound to some when you think about Cliff Kingsbury and a team led by him and Kyler Murray. It's just kind of where they are at right now. I don't think they're fully equipped to get into a gunfight here. I really don't. Other side of the ball, quickly.
Do you have any optimism for an
thing.
Arizona defense that's taking on water faster than the Titanic?
Yeah, I mean, it has not been good since the loss of J.J. Watt. And we've talked about that a little bit. 23rd in EPA per play since Watt went down. With Watt, the first 7 weeks of the season, number 2 in EPA per play allowed defensively. Obviously, we've mentioned this probably too much to the liking of Cardinals fans, but lots of guys also played over their heads early on in the season, specifically in the secondary. We just kind of looked at the parts and we're like, Budda Baker's nice. Your lead corner, okay. Murphy's okay. He's not going to match up against true number ones, and we saw Cooper Kupp just annihilate him in the second matchup. And then the rest of the guys are kind of meh. 33-year-old Elford, who's now on IR. There's just not a lot of dudes back there. J.J. Watt is going to return to practice in a couple hours from now for the first time since the pec injury. And specific to this matchup, if he's able to go, that is a bonus, right? You have to get pressure on Matthew Stafford. And the Rams are vulnerable to interior pressure on their O-line. but you have to bring natural pressure. That's the key. So J.J. Watt would be a huge get back here for Arizona. But that's how it's got to happen, because I think Vance Joseph has to kind of relax a little bit on the blitz rate. 4th highest blitz rate in the league. As bad as Stafford has been down the stretch, and certainly a ton of mistakes. I believe it's 10 interceptions in the last 4 games. Stafford's still eating the blitz alive. 132 passer rating. He's still very savvy, still very heady. He still is able to beat the blitz, being cognizant pre-snap of what's going on. So you have to get natural pressure on the inside specifically. So that is why J.J. Watt is so valuable to this game. The Rams, if you look at them recently, the run rate has increased a touchdown the stretch. We saw, even 3rd and 7 late against San Francisco, right? First down could have ended the game. McVay ran and punted, right? Spent all the draft capital and assets to acquire Stafford. Didn't have him win it with the final throw. Very weird, but something to think about. To your point, though, at the very top, when you look at these divisional matchups, I do think history has some weight. And you mentioned McVay has owned the Cardinals, won 9 of 10 matchups. The Rams have outperformed the market in those games, in those 10 games, by nearly 10 points. The only loss in that 10-game sample comes a week after the Rams beat Tom Brady and the defending Super Bowl champion Buccaneers. So maybe, kind of a slight look ahead there. That's ultimately what would make me nervous back in the Cardinals, is how dominant the Rams have been in this series. It just feels like McVay has his number a little bit. Aside from that, have seen a little under money come in on this at 50.5. There was a buy on the key of 51 downwards. That's now why we're down to 49.5. Again, I think the Cardinals take a little bit more of a run approach here, unless they get behind a bunch. We've seen, aside from last week, the Rams have started these games slow in recent times. Have come out very, very slow in the first half, again, aside from last week. But then that game changed once San Francisco was able to get some interior pressure on Stafford. So it's a very interesting game from that perspective. Don't have anything on the side or total quite yet, but maybe we'll get there in a few minutes.
When you look at this Rams team, I know a lot was made out of them earlier this year. We saw how strongly the market responded to them in a game we broke down at great lengths against the Green Bay Packers. Do you believe the Rams can regain that form that makes them a legitimate threat in the NFC if Matthew Stafford gets back to the quarterback we saw earlier in the season? Or have you seen enough down the stretch that leads you to believe this team is a little bit flawed and not going to quite have the horses to get them over the hump?
Yeah, when you look at them, they're very top-heavy. All right, it's just kind of how they've designed it by nature. You have a lot of guys that I would say probably more than any team that are worth to a point spread, right? When you kind of just look at the makeup, right, like Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald, those guys are worth a ton to the spread. And I just feels like the Rams have more of those guys. But there are vulnerable and there are holes in certain areas. Let me be candid here. Like, both Arizona and Rams would be fade teams for me right now. And we just didn't get the right matchups to fall here. And so that, I think, is how most of the guys that I speak with view both the Cardinals and Rams, that they are sell teams. And unfortunately, when they play each other, you can't
tough
really...
Tough to sell both teams.
It's tough to sell. It's tough to sell a team. I'll be candid. I am looking forward to this week. I'm happy it's here. I've kind of just gotten over the Week 17, the Week 18 added slate, and certainly the games in Week 18 were very good. There's a lot of intrigue late in some of those. But it's just like kind of get us over the line and get us back to the playoffs here. And just like, the constant COVID and checking of players is just getting so ridiculous. So I'm happy we're here. In saying that, I don't necessarily love all of the matchups. I don't think there's a ton of value in some of these matchups, again, because you have two fade teams in the Cardinals and Rams, and it's the line that you have that's really off, right, is Chiefs Steelers, but who's running to the well confidently backing the Steelers here. And so this week doesn't present a ton from my perspective, at least at this point.
No, it's always a valuable lesson. I think a lot of times people see that sand ticking through the hourglass, realizing that the NFL is winding down and they want to have a wager on every game. But for those of us that do it professionally, if a weekend slate, whether it's 6 games, 4 games, or 2 games, doesn't offer you an opportunity to try and invest, there's no reason to force. There's all sorts of other angles to be taken, whether it's prop bets, whether it's derivatives, whether it's betting live. There are so many other ways to try and turn a profit, and I think people have to be cognizant of that regardless of how few games remain on the schedule. We do have one other thing to discuss, and that, of course, is trying to figure out where we're going for a best bet potentially. But before we get there, Payne, I didn't allow you at the top of the show to do a victory lap for what we saw unfold on Monday. As president chairman, have you seen an influx of applications for the Stetson Bennett fan club surge through? And are we going to see a much lower acceptance rate that'll put us on the same levels of those elite Ivy League institutions for membership applications that you're actually going to take?
I'll be candid. I knew they were going to come in, and this was a big week with it being super wild card weekend. I haven't even looked at them. I'm sure the inbox is just inundated at this point, but we're not even looking at them right now. Okay, so we'll evaluate them once things slow down a little bit here on the NFL front. But I'm sure they're coming in fast and furious.
Hey, you know what? If you want to sell shirts that are Bet the Board branded that say "I'm a Stetson man," I'm sure there'll be plenty of folks throughout Athens and the metropolitan Georgia area and maybe other hamlets in the SEC that would buy those things as fast as they got printed. But all right.
Was that a very frustrating game early on? It felt like Georgia just wasn't doing what was necessary early on. It just felt like it was going to be one of those annoying games, and then all of a sudden the miracle fumble with a guy recovering it that didn't even have a tenth of recovering it. And you're down, and you're like, Jesus, this is just, it's done. It's going to be too much to overcome. They just can't get over the Bama hurdle mentally. And then Stetson Bennett comes out, saves the day, leads 2 touchdown drives. Todd Monken finally got his head out of his ass and was aggressive. The ground game got rolling in the second half. That was something we discussed. I remember, off the top of my head, everyone wanted to talk Stetson Bennett, but we're in that first matchup, Georgia's offensive line, which is supposed to be great, right? I think they have an average star rating of 0.944 along the offensive line, generated 1.9 yards of space in the opening in the SEC title game, and running backs broke a combined 1 tackle. And in the first half, that number was 1.1 yards of space before first contact. Running backs, again, had broken 1 tackle in the first half. And then in the second half, everything changed a little bit. So running backs were fantastic in the second half. Todd Monken opened some things up on drives where he needed to, and Stetson Bennett delivered the mail. Yeah,
you know what it felt like? It felt like every game where we have an underdog that has 9,000 chances in the first half to put the game away allows the favorite to hang around. And this time the shoe was on the other foot as Georgia hung on by the skin of their teeth with Alabama settling for field goals that if those were turned into touchdowns, it became one-way traffic that would have ended poorly. To Georgia's credit, they were able to fight back. They were the more physical team and arguably the better conditioned team in the fourth quarter. Although I will say I'm not quite sure Georgia finds a way to win if Jamison Williams unfortunately doesn't tear up his knee. You hope that it doesn't impact his draft status or anything else, because it didn't appear that Georgia had a great game plan for containing Alabama's big play receiver, at least through the first couple of series.
Yeah. I think his biggest catch was certainly the one that he got injured on. And part of the handicap had been how good Georgia was in the red zone and holding to 3. And I think Alabama had some struggles there relative to Alabama in some of the red zone. So it wasn't completely shocking that they were okay down there, kind of keeping things alive for Stetson Bennett to then wake up late. There's no doubt about that.
Yep, you take it. Congratulations to all the Georgia fans out there that have waited more than 30 years for that elusive national championship to come back to Athens. We digress, though. As we mentioned, it may not be the most attractive betting slate, but there's always at least one opportunity to try and make a few bucks. And as far as best bets are concerned, Payne, where do we put our gaudy record on the line this weekend?
Yeah, it's a little bit weird. I know we talked about this off air a little bit. We initially were thinking a side on Sunday, specifically in the middle game. But I want to wait for an injury to come down, and I'd gotten shot a text that this might increase a little bit, so I don't want to be on the wrong side of a line move at a number that important. So we've kind of navigated this a little bit. And we're going to go with the Monday night game. It's going to be a little bit of a derivative market. We're going to go with the Arizona Cardinals team total under 23.5 points. And I made mention of this in the breakdown, how the offense now is 19th in EPA per play since the loss of DeAndre Hopkins. If you look at their early down success rate, they've won that battle 2 times since DeAndre Hopkins has been down. I think there's going to be an approach here where they're going to try to run a little bit, as I mentioned, from 3 wide sets. I just don't see a ton of weaponry here outside for Arizona. Let's keep an eye on Rondell Moore. Maybe he's back this week. Even the running backs we've mentioned, Edmonds, Connor, dealing with rib injuries, a toe injury, a heel injury. Neither are 100%. In addition to the Cardinals offense struggling on an EPA per play basis and Kyler Murray struggling since this last meeting, they've also struggled mightily in the red zone recently. When the Cardinals were on fire and you have Hopkins, which is a big threat, can go up and catch a jump ball, they've regressed a little bit in the red zone. They're down to like a 44% conversion rate, down from the mid-60s. And so I think that helps as well if the Rams are going to maybe give up a drive or two that you're holding for field goals. So I think that's interesting because I do believe, and again, it's Monday night, who knows, it's a standalone playoff game. The market might not reflect the information, but we have seen some serious under money here from a serious group, and I think it would continue, although I don't know how much lower this can get once the public gets involved and they're off work on Monday pummeling this over because they've seen the first 2 matchups go over. I think that's probably the best plan of attack, going with the Arizona Cardinals team total under 23.5. And hopefully next week we have some matchups that present themselves in some situations where we're not kind of figuring out injuries in the middle of the week and it happens to be a game around a very vital key.
Come on, football gods. Give us the matchups that we can sink our teeth into, not only from a watchability standpoint, but also to try and have a big-time opportunity to make a few bucks. Anything else that you would like to add, my friend, on the culmination of our Super Wild Card Weekend pod as we inch ever so close to the 2-hour threshold?
No, I think we get out of Dodge. This ran a little bit long. Producers probably wondering where we're at. I know you have an obligation in about 11 minutes, so let's get out of Dodge. Back next week on Thursday for the divisional round. 4 big games. Thanks, as always, to John Sheeran stepping in and offering perspective from behind the counter that's unprecedented anywhere else throughout the industry, not only on this weekend's games, but also some larger industry topics. I want to encourage all of you to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Again, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already done so and you live in a state where FanDuel is available to you, FanDuel.com. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. Take advantage of all of their great new user sign-up bonuses just in time for the playoffs to help you build that bankroll as we inch ever so close to handing out the Lombardi Trophy in Los Angeles. Monday night with an Arizona Cardinals team total under ticket in hand. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.